Morning, Bitcoiners. Good morning. Hope you're doing well. I am back on the farm. Here we are. Boo Boo has a good morning, Bitcoiners. T Dog Yo Yo says, GM, where do I sats? Bon matin. Good morning, everyone. Bien sûr, where do I sats? Bon matin à tous. C'est sûr. So we're going to wait for folks to come in. But I gotta say, the sun is real bright this morning, guys. We got Mega Sun. Sean recommends. GM, good morning. Indeed, that sun is pretty up. You can see some of the nice lines coming in here. We got the whiteboard back, but we didn't whiteboard today. We shall soon. Bitcoin's running up the charts. Did you see that? We're running away in price this morning. Life looks pretty good, isn't it? Right? Everyone's all excited. Looks like Bitcoin is going to do something amazing in the charts, which is reverse its death cross and move into a golden cross. So for those of you who follow technical analysis, it's a pretty big deal. I think I'll be hosting Fed Watch tomorrow with my man Ansel Linder, and I bet we'll be talking more about this. So all that's left for us to do today, we got the sun up, Bitcoin's running. Let's have some coffee, talk about what's new. I'm fairly new here. Good morning, indeed. Thanks for coming, Pyramid 7. We won't be talking about pyramids today, but we often do. We are big fans of pyramids. Did you know that I actually figured out what the pyramids are all about? Did I tell you? I was telling Francis Pouliot this weekend at the Canadian Bitcoin conference, and I'll share it with you real quick. So you remember what was around the pyramids? There was like a casing around it that was insulation, right? There was an insulant put on top. People said there used to be a golden capstone on top. And the pyramids themselves are made of granite. And inside the granite is quartz. Did you know that if you put a ton of pressure on quartz, it will create electricity? That vibrations and frequencies pushed against quartz will actually create electricity. That's why those watches with the quartz in them are able to get charged just by moving. You know those watches? So those watches that charge themselves with the quartz, that's because, as I said, movement, friction, and pressure will actually create an electrical charge out of quartz. The pyramids are made of quartz. All that pressure on those stones is actually creating electricity. And if you look at those chambers inside of them, what you see are probably where you'd put a liquid to get the vibrations and the frequency. So once the frequency is correct, it probably created electricity out of it. And that's why you see 2 or 3 pyramids in one place. It was a power plant. They're just power plants, right? And that kind of explains what Tesla was talking about when he talked about the power of pyramids to do this. And when everyone's talking about the energy for it will be that we're going to be headed. I don't think it's a theory anymore, Bitcoin Graffiti. I think I figured it out. So, by the way, I've mentioned this a few times. Well, I mean, it's still a theory. I don't think I've actually figured it out, but it explains everything, right? It actually explains everything. So, as I've said a few times, and I was talking about this with Francis Pouliot at the event in Toronto this weekend, he remembers because when we were chatting at Bitcoin 2021, you know, when it's like today and Bitcoin's running up and then we get to all-time highs, I kind of like I'm more into the bear market talking about Bitcoin like this in these conditions. When that happens, my attention sort of turns a little bit to other things. And in the 2021 run, all I cared about was Atlantis, the reshot structure, and pyramids. I've been on the pyramid thing for a long time. And the Plato stuff. It was like a college hobby of mine when I was in law school. Loved it. And I sort of refound those stories during the pandemic and all those crazy lockdowns. So I started getting really into it. And now the reshot structure has become like a mainstream idea. But anyway, that's what I think the pyramids were. I think those they were power plants, and I think Tesla had more or less recreated it. So we'll see. That's kind of what we're talking about today, right? We're going to get into it. So first, right? Normally we like to start. So this is for you. Normally we like to start with. What is this? I just wanted one more thing about the sun. The sun is going to be as up as it will be this year in the north. I think UTXO today is the 21st. That's not true. As Bitcoiners know, I did a show a long time ago, the paraphilion and the aphelion, right? So these are indeed the longest days, but they are not the day at which Earth is furthest from the sun or closest to the sun. That's actually July 4th, right? July 4th and January 3rd. The twin core relationship between Bitcoin and America is sort of solidified even in the celestial movements. So believe it or not, today might be the longest day, but it's not exactly the furthest, closest point to the Earth. So it will be actually higher on July 4th. And weirdly, I live exactly, I live on the 45th parallel, the exact midpoint between the hemisphere and the North Pole. So I get the perfect 12 hours on the equinox days. So there you go. Fun stuff. Yes, P-Man Van, we are back on the farm and we're loving it. Happy. Got the internet set up. And by the way, I finally figured out how to get a wired connection to my Starlink. So you are now I'm coming at you not on Wi-Fi through a Starlink, but through a hardwired connection through Starlink. And I think it's going to be better. I think we finally figured out our connection issues out here. But all of this connections, you're not here for that. I know what you're here for. You guys want Moscow time. What's the fakest news I can find today? I got some good ones. The Associated Press, Pentagon accounting error provides an extra $6.2 billion for Ukraine military aid. Whoa, cool, guys. Wicked. $6.2 billion accounting error. So good. Now, finding money like that, right? We're worried about inflation, what's going on. Inflation's coming down, but all of a sudden they're finding money. Will they find more? The New Yorker doesn't really have time for that. What they want to know is, why isn't Joe Biden getting more credit for a big drop in inflation? Why isn't he getting credit? Where's the credit? Good job, Joe Biden. The Los Angeles Times, this is a new genre of Moscow time. Remember a couple weeks ago, I predicted, it was a very easy prediction, but I gotta, what we do here is we make predictions and then we check and see if they're right. If they're wrong, we got to share it. If they're right, we got to share it too, right? We got to share when we get these predictions right, because that's what we're here for, right? We're here to see if our predictions are correct. And so we're testing them, we're sharing them, we're saying them publicly. A few weeks ago, right, when I saw that RFK was starting to move up in the polls and getting more attention and sucking the energy out of all the debates and forcing people to talk about him and forcing people to hear what he's saying, I obviously predicted you were going to hear way more fake news about him, right? That he would start to become a major figure in Moscow time headlines. And we had one yesterday with the NBC thing, that with the dogs, right? The dogs and the hawks. Because he's a falconer, right? So he trains birds. So NBC, put a big story together that he's trained dogs through intermittent reward, denying them rewards, so that sometimes when they get the treat that they're more disciplined. He learned it from falconry. Ooh, weird guy. What a weird guy, man. No, I did it. I had the perfect voice when I was describing this to my wife. It was, oh yeah. So he's like weird because he's into dogs and like falcons. I don't know if he can be the president because he's into falcons, and it made me worried. And his dogs were like not even getting any traits. It was so crazy. So that was the story that NBC wrote yesterday, which made Moscow time. But remember, we're not here to add a punchline for Moscow time. I'm just going to tell you what the Los Angeles Times had to say about Robert Kennedy Jr. Column. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a threat to your health and our democracy. He's a threat to your health and our democracy. Why isn't Joe Biden getting credit for the inflation thing? And Robert Kennedy is a threat to our democracy. So now the censorship stuff has sort of kicked in. He gave a great speech last night, Robert Kennedy. I watched it. It was excellent. It was in New Hampshire. And of course, it was suppressed on YouTube. It was unlisted, managed to get very few viewers. And on Rumble, on the other hand, he was up to about 40,000 concurrent viewers. So that was pretty different. Now he's also getting run off of other interviews that he's given. So YouTube has removed part of his interview with Jordan Peterson from a few weeks ago. So that's off YouTube now. You have to go to Rumble to see that. And again, it sort of brings up the debate question again, right? So if there were two people in any of these debates, if there was ever a counter voice or a counterweight, would they still be banned, right? If there was a counter argument that had been presented, would they still be banned? Because remember what we said a long time ago, power plants for what and for whom? Atlantis, I don't know, Patrick. Ancient civilizations, antediluvian civilizations, pre-flood world. So there you go. Yeah, that was it. So going back to the RFK question, so would there be a ban on any of these conversations if there were a counterpoint? Remember what we said? Remember we predicted here, speaking of predictions, that the community notes thing was going to be a major deal, right? We've been saying that on this show since community notes first debuted. We explained where community notes came from, the software, the algorithmic approach to community notes. Of course, it comes from Taiwan, where they had tried to get away from these kinds of polarizing, upvoting sort of Reddit systems that really just don't give you an idea of the truth. They really look for the most polarizing points of view, and those things sort of rise to the top. Community Notes was based on this Taiwanese approach that they'd used for some form of public debate software, which was really just about finding the aggregate point of view. So the thing that transcended and traversed the two polarities of blue and red or black and white ends up getting surfaced as community notes. So once you see that it's coming from multiple sources, it seems to be more credible. We've used that frame for a long time to judge what is fake news. So if both Fox, in an old era, right, I don't think it applies anymore, in a previous era, if you saw Fox News reporting something and CNN reporting something, it was probably true. If you saw only one side seeing it and the other side completely ignored it, usually fake on both sides. If Fox News was hallucinating something and no one else saw it, probably wasn't true. Just like if CNN saw something and were hallucinating it and no one else saw it, a hallucination and probably fake news. That doesn't really work anymore. I think the Hunter Biden case, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, has sort of short-circuited a bit of that. But there you go. Again, we wonder if, we've had all these conversations about the debates and what would happen. If there were debate, would these videos get taken down? I don't know. But YouTube has definitely continued its censorship of Kennedy, and there were several stories related to it in the past little while. So it's more than just that video. We talked about the Luke Rudkowski video that was taken down, just a clip. And his channel was demonetized. His channel, not just the video, his channel. So anyway, there you go. So RFK ended up in New Hampshire last night and gave what I think was a really beautiful speech. You should go have a listen to it. If you haven't, I'll summarize it real quick. He was drawing comparisons to a speech his uncle gave about peace with Russia. And one of the really interesting parts of the speech was that he underlined that John F. Kennedy asked the audience to sort of put themselves into the Russian shoes, right? Put yourself in their shoes and think about what they've been going through. And he talked about World War II, and how JFK mentioned that more or less the Russians won World War II in the sense that they softened up the Germans enough for the Americans to make it sort of like a summer European trip. And it was like, I've been describing World War II from the American perspective for a long time, relative to the other belligerents in the war, as pretty simple, right? They arrived in the D-Day in the summer, had to go through the winter, but Germany was KO by April, right? It didn't even last a year, right? They smashed them. And the Japanese were just a few months later. Don't want to diminish the sacrifice, but if you just even look at casualties, of course, Americans in the European forum, nowhere near the other belligerents. America had a much harder time and carried much more water with the Japanese fight, and we've sort of forgotten, but the Japanese war machine was at least as formidable as the Nazi one, maybe more, right? Like, I'm kind of the mind that the real challenge were the Japanese in some ways, for that time and era. But we've spent so much time mythologizing the Nazis and Hitler and all of that stuff, so it's hard to really understand. I could be completely wrong. I don't know if the Japanese military was actually more powerful than the Nazi one. But it gave the Americans a much harder time. And I believe the casualty list that Americans suffered against the Japanese were far higher, mostly because they were the only opponent as well that was of scale, right? The British didn't help as much with the Japanese and all that stuff. Anyway, what he said was that the Russians were actually the ones who won the war. They weakened Hitler. They talked about their sacrifice for that war. And in the speech, he said it would imagine like every city east of Chicago and all the farms and all the land had just been destroyed. The cities, the land, everything. That would be sort of the American equivalent to understand the scale of sacrifice that was made by the Russians at the time. But it was that point about what he called sort of a spiritual call, right? And to use empathy in order to understand someone else's point of view. And P-Man Van, we're not putting them down, right? We're not putting them down. It's not an insult. It's just perspective, right? We're trying to put it in its scale and its perspective. We appreciate them, right? There's no doubt about it. We don't like Nazis. We don't want Nazis winning any war, right? And they had to be destroyed and obliterated. So for sure. But the point was that the Russians made a huge sacrifice, and for Americans at the time when Kennedy was describing this, to say that they were the only one who sacrificed, or to forget the sacrifice that the Russians made, wouldn't have been very helpful. And what he was saying is, why are we going to war now? And one of the interesting things, or why are we arming ourselves against the Russians? Now, I will say historically, John F. Kennedy is partly responsible for the arms race. He used it as a political tool in order to get attention for the 1960 election. The missile gap, which was his main talking point on that election, was fake. Eisenhower warned about the industrial military complex because he thought Kennedy was going down that road with missile gap as one of his main election platforms, right? The missile gap being, oh, the Russians are building all these weapons, we have to too, or else we're never going to beat them in the future. Eisenhower knew the truth. There was no way Russia was ever going to pose a real threat to America. It just, the scale wasn't there. And he knew that. He was flying over with the B-52 bombers. They had done a lot of spy reconnaissance on Russia. The approach that Eisenhower had was simply to make America consumers, right? So that the consumer manufacturing base could easily pivot to military if it needed. But the point was not to rearm and to increase arms or anything like that. The actual decision that was made was to partner with Edward Bernays, and who is Freud's nephew, right? And they're the ones who turned Americans into consumers as a military strategy, right? In order to keep the manufacturing base strong, in order to pivot. And that was sort of Eisenhower's vision. He worried and went the way of the military-industrial complex speech because of what Kennedy was promising in his elections, and even asked to one of his aides, was my speech about the military-industrial complex all a waste of time, and were all of my years trying to demilitarize America a waste of time? now that this guy's here? Well, it looks like Kennedy learned real quick that he was misled and had to come up with some new ideas, because what he found out was that his entire military advisory and all of these people were absolutely lying to him, right? He was never getting credible information. RFK has been talking about that a lot. RFK described how he spent time in the office, and weirdly, we were talking about the emergency hotline phone yesterday, and how Xi sort of told Blinken, "Come on, like we're not going to get involved in this drama with you guys, right? If you really are serious, just give me a call. We're not going to war. You don't need a hotline." Well, weirdly, RFK described how Kennedy and Khrushchev created a hotline between themselves because they both realized that they were getting lied to. So Kennedy told a really hilarious story about a KGB. Everyone knew he was a KGB spy, right? They'd met him at the embassy, and they started inviting him over to the house, knowing what he was, exactly knowing what he was, who he was. And the kids, all the Kennedy kids, were like, "There's this Russian KGB spy here." And of course, the military was really upset with the Kennedys for meeting with this guy. What they were doing, though, is slipping in letters from Khrushchev into Wall Street or New York Times newspapers, and then they started a dialogue between the president of the United States, John F. Kennedy, and Khrushchev in Russia. And they ended up creating that hotline phone, and Kennedy told a really funny story about how everyone knew you weren't supposed to touch that phone because Khrushchev would answer. And, they were like sort of teenage kids, right? So pretty funny stuff. The idea that they should talk and that they were not interested in a forever war, but their advisors were, right? Their advisors were interested in this war. And the point was that the leaders knew and were the only ones not interested in it, and had to create their own dialogue to get away from the advisors, who were constantly ratcheting up tensions and trying to get more let's call it conflict, but really they're just doing their job. Their job was to ease tensions, but you can sort of create those tensions, a little bit like what we said with the drama that Xi said about the phone in the first place, right? Like it's just going to create more things to talk about, more reasons for which we would have stress and pressure and conversations about rising tensions and all that kind of stuff. So that was the interesting point. But to bring it back to the real crux of what was going on, and what I heard was so important from the RFK speech, and where he's headed with this. So first of all, he says that Americans, so that empathy thing was sort of a spiritual call, right? To put yourself in someone else's shoes and to think about things like this. And mentioned how RFK or JFK in his speech for peace. So he was, RFK was doing his speech and referring to what he thought was JFK's most important speech, which is the one he gave on putting yourselves in the shoes of these Russians, which was done as part of a major peace address, right? So he was trying to get to peace at that point. So what he ended up saying, though, is that it was kind of like a spiritual call, and that you don't often hear leaders these days talking about such uncomfortable things as spirituality, God. And what he said is that Americans deserve a president who starts to talk to them about this stuff, not giving them answers, but just not embarrassed about bringing up these subjects as if they're going to get these same people who say things like, "Why isn't Biden getting more credit for inflation?" Right? Those same people would say crazy things like, "Why is he talking? There's no place to talk to us about God," right? The separation of church and state means you can't hear anything about these things from these leaders. But of course, JFK was very interested in talking about these things with people. And RFK, too, is interested in talking about these things with people. And he went on to say, which I think was the most interesting thing of it all, right? RFK said that as president, right, he would do those things. He would sort of keep talking to folks about, their own spiritual, let's call it fulfillment, their own spiritual growth. And he said that his path to the presidency is simply by telling people the truth about what he thinks about a variety of important issues. And if Americans are ready for the truth, he's just going to win. And I do think it's that simple. I do. In the end, I think it's that simple, that RFK's path to the presidency is to literally tell the truth. And if there is an appetite for that, there might not be. right? What we saw from CNN, for example, when they put Trump on CNN that day, is people don't really want the truth. They want their lies, and they want the story, and they want what makes them, what they're used to hearing, right? CNN tried to go legit for a little while. They tried to do like news down the middle. Their whole base turned against them. They did not want to hear about Trump. They didn't want to hear about Trump getting what sounded like, when Trump did the show, the town hall on CNN, it sounded like a laugh track. He was so charming, right? It sounded like a sitcom laugh track, because he was so well timed. The audience was responding exactly when he exactly when he wanted them to. He sort of had them in his hands. And when that happened, of course, it led to Chris Licht, the CNN CEO, getting fired. And so people really do prefer having their own illusions, right? And if you take those away, it's not always going to work out. And that's really the main obstacle to RFK being president. Human nature just might not want to deal with the enormity of the truth bomb that he's offering, right? But he's right. I think he's comfortable in that situation. He says, look, if Americans have this appetite and they're capable of receiving my promise, I'm just gonna not lie, right? I'm just not gonna lie. I'm gonna do my best. That doesn't mean he can be right, right? He's wrong about a bunch of stuff. We've seen he's wrong about a ton of stuff. How many of his claims that he said on Joe Rogan do you think are actually true? The vaccines, the Wi-Fi, whatever else he went on, maybe half, probably not, right? But that's besides the point. It's the same with Trump, right? That was how I felt about Trump. Trump is a liar, right? He is a liar about all kinds of things, but they're the little things, right? They're the numbers. Directionally, he's completely honest, right? Directionally, he's not lying. He's telling you where he's going, and on the big things is honest. It's the little things that are, the packaging, the wrapping of a story. Of course, Trump, you can't stop it, right? He's a New York wheeler and dealer, and he'll always be that. And when he has something to sell, he's going to put a nice bow on it. He's going to make the packaging, a little better than what's inside the package. That's just how he's been. But it's easy to forgive him for that, right? And it's the same way. I don't need him to be honest about how you tie a bow, just like I don't need RFK to be right about any of this stuff. As long as you're willing to talk, and that's what he said is going on in Russia. That's the main problem, right? Joe Biden simply will not talk to Putin. He listed all the leaders that have had relations with Soviet or Russian leaders in the past. It's all of them. They all met, right? JFK met Khrushchev, Nixon, they all met, right? Reagan met, Bush met, everybody met. But what's happened since, and he described the appetite that there was for peace a year ago, because we found out now there was a peace deal on the table 1 year ago. And that peace deal was scuttled by Boris Johnson, and because it looked like the United States didn't want to go to wanted to go to war. Now, here's where we start getting into a really great simulation wink, right? We're actually dealing with on a day, and as a Canadian, I'm not American, right? I've lived in the United States. I'm a U.S. taxpayer. I'm heavily, obviously, interested in America. I believe I have a stake, just like everyone else in the world has a stake in the future of America and where it's headed. But as a Canadian, I've always had an appreciation for monarchies. I have, right? I don't like the new king, right? And I think it's all changing and all those things. And I'm not talking about specific monarchs, but I am talking about the idea of a king or a queen or all of these things. And one of the things that I noticed when America had its Clinton problem, with the blowjob and the girl and the dress and the, all that stuff, right? Well, that's just not we don't infuse morality into our leaders in the Commonwealth system, because the queen is there to take care of that, right? You can have a prime minister who's a dirtbag, and it won't really matter. Who cares about the morality of some of these people, right? But it looks like America's changing, and it looks like America does need some form of, now I'm not calling it monarchy, but let's call it better people, right? Better people. And what we saw from RFK is someone who has spent their life gone through a lot. Like in the speech, he talked about some of the stuff he's been through, right? You go to your father. He was with his dad. I didn't know that. He was with his dad when he was killed. And he talked about the train trip that took 7 hours from New York City to Washington because everybody came out on the street and the train tracks, pardon me, for the whole route. And there were millions of people from rural and urban places that were there to salute Robert Kennedy. And he talked about how in the same way he was not given any chance in 1968 when Robert Kennedy was running for president, but he had just won in the same day because they were doing the primaries, right? He just won in the same day. California, the most urban state in the country, as well as South Dakota, the most rural. So he had won urban and rural. And it looked like he was going to put together enough steam and enough energy to win the Democrat nomination. But it didn't work out. So what RFK was talking about was his memory of that train ride down to DC and people singing Battle Hymn of the Republic, with the one of the most beautiful songs in American history. I don't know if you know it, but it was the song that the Union Army would sing in the Civil War. It's based on a biblical passage about the grapes of wrath, right? Which is where the book by John Steinbeck, The Grapes of Wrath, got its title. Where the grapes of wrath are sown, glory, glory, hallelujah. One of the lines is, Jesus died to make men holy, let us die to make men free, and the truth goes marching on. One of the most beautiful songs. It actually came to the writer, like in her twilight sleep, and all the lyrics, she thought she was hearing it and then wrote it down, and it became one of the biggest hits, sort of in American history. And that's what people were singing, the whole train ride, right? And the truth goes marching on. I have a terrible voice, guys, so I'm not going to sing too much. Even in Japan, the most polite people, they love their karaoke. And I warned everyone, I still do karaoke. There's a few songs I know how to sneak in there. And but I can still remember the polite people, the polite Japanese people saying, well, you can't be good at everything. There you go. Not a good singer. So all I want to do, though, is talk about this idea of, in the end, Robert Kennedy is a kind of prince, right? We talked about Camelot for a long time as the Kennedy family, right? They talk about his home where he grew up in Hyannisport as Camelot. Now, he's more of a DC New Yorker in his life, but they always had that cottage in Martha's Vineyard. And it's sort of mythical in American folklore. If you don't know about the Kennedy home in Martha's Vineyard, it's the closest thing Americans have to a kind of royal castle-y compound. The house is nothing like a castle. It's just a typical house on the coast made of wood. It's a very American house. There's nothing castle-y about it, but it had this compound sort of aspect to it that Americans were always super curious about, right? It was a big thing. Now, I say all of this to contrast with another prince, a real prince, Hunter Biden. So Hunter Biden had his plea deal yesterday. And this is the simulation wink and why I think it's just amazing, right? We actually are presented with two princes currently. We had RFK talking about, bringing in, and even shares princely hobbies like the Arab princes. The Arab princes, of course, all are falconers, right? They all raise falcons. They all do that. RFK, typical sort of royal hobby. Even being an environmentalist, the way he is sort of a royal hobby. Even his profession of being an environmental litigator and being sort of a champion, that's kind of the noblesse oblige royal attitude that people who appreciate monarchy, those are the reasons for which they appreciate monarchy, right? Because it does produce people who are maybe not worried about money and status so much because it's a guarantee. What they're more interested in doing is self-actualization and becoming a better person. Of course, Buddha himself was a royal, right? And had to go through the denial of all of his privileges and benefits that he had at birth in order to become the Buddha. So this is sort of the noblesse oblige story that has been around, and we have seen produce fantastic people in history, and it looks like RFK is one of those. But the Hunter Biden plea deal came in yesterday, and it couldn't be better, right? So Hunter Biden, of course, we've seen the Marco Polo file. It's something like 630 pages, 459 crimes, 190 sex crimes, 128 drug crimes, 140 business crimes. Now, again, right, I think a lot of these are probably of the Donald Trump variety, right? Like the boxes were there, but the paper should have been there, document management, right? So of these, whatever, 459 crimes, how many are real, right? Who knows? I don't know, right? I don't know. But the plea deal yesterday just ignored all of them, right? So even the drug ones, and everyone's pointing at the hypocrisy. Of course, Joe Biden was one of the leading proponents of the crack cocaine bill, the crime bill, the 1994 crime bill that sent millions of Americans to prison, right? So, and now we had video of his son actually just doing crack, right? So that isn't even in dispute. He was doing the things for which his dad said were absolutely criminal and is famous for making criminal in 1994. But of course, now people going further, saying, why were those things not prosecuted? Prosecutor Kaneko the Great says Joe Biden is weaponizing federal law enforcement to imprison his leading political rival for life over a document dispute with bureaucrats at the National Archives. At the same time, the DOJ covers up hundreds of crimes committed by the Bidens and their business associates. So Tucker Carlson did his 5th show yesterday, and it was all about this princely racket, right? It was about the prince that Hunter Biden is. And one of the things, and so we're going to get further into the simulation here. So first of all, let's just do the numbers quickly on the Tucker thing. It was at about 10 million viewers when I checked this morning. So his 5 total viewers, I went back and checked. Number 1 is at 120 million. Number 2 came at 60. Number 3 went back above 100. That was that barn burner he did on I forget which one that was. Anyway, and then number 4, of course, was 30 million. It made it up to, and now number 5 is 9, right? So the change here, well, I mean, the numbers are good, I'd say. He's still above Fox, and that's fine. So he starts off with the MSNBC interview recently that Joe Biden did about Hunter, and what they said was, you have something personal bothering you. So Tucker points out, personal, like this is criminal. Why would this be just about the personal angle? So right away insulating it. And then they said there's no ties to you, and what Tucker said is the answer is in the question. So basically that the answer being in the question when asking him, like, how do you handle this stuff and all those types of things, basically eliminates the questions about the crimes and the $10 million and what's going on, right? So now Trump had predicted, right? He had predicted they were going to hit Hunter with something small in order to cover what they did to Trump. But what Tucker points out is that the obvious thing with the Foreign Agent Registration Act, FARA, and the money laundering, and he talked about the book he wrote. But here's where the simulation comes in, and here's where the Bitcoin piece comes into it, right? So remember I said that we heard from RFK that the whole point is about his own capacity to just tell the truth and share the sort of spiritual insights that he's had, and that Americans deserve a president who isn't afraid to talk to them about God and spirituality and these things. Meanwhile, Tucker underlined what I've been saying for a long time. It's the first time I've ever heard this out in public, right? from a major broadcaster is what I mean, right? Every normal person on Twitter has been wondering about this. But they asked what Hunter Biden is doing now, and it's self-actualization. He's like an artist guy who's just trying to find himself. And they showed all the clips of him showing around his art gallery where he comes to like stay sane. Then he talked about the money laundering piece, right? How much money laundering is probably going on with this art. It's, $500,000 for an original, 75,000 for prints. But then again, let's just compare and put those things together. The inversion of virtue is what Tucker called it, right? The inversion of virtue. So this guy is the self-actualizer, right? And if you talk about God, now, what do we know about Bitcoiners, and what do we know about how Bitcoin changes your own personal life, right? It does do that. It is a self-actualization tool, right? It's the type of thing you use in order to orient yourself in a number of subjects, right? Taking away the cognitive load of learning about markets and saving money and earning money and financial engineering actually allows you to take that cognitive load and start learning how to be a better person, right? And everyone who has gotten into Bitcoin knows what Bitcoin can do for them personally, how much of an effect it's had on their own personal life. So we are offered this really weird contrast here of one prince getting treated so well and so favorably, another prince getting treated so terribly, and we're left to decide which one we want. At this point, the choice is so vivid between the two, right? Do you want the one where you get the staged questions, or do you want the one where you get the clearly designed to sort of make fun of you and censor you and all of these things, right? So the contrast couldn't be better. And we are dealing with two princes, one who's got a racket, right? One who's got a challenge for people. And those things themselves are enough, I think, enough to wedge a little more people out of the stupor that's out there. And the good news is looking back and seeing these contrasts, looking back and seeing what's going on between what Hunter is clearly sort of articulating about the Biden administration. We heard about the money. We know about Ukraine, maybe hiding crimes. Looks like it's pretty bad. And if you contrast that with what's going on with the RFK question, like I said, the question is clear. Now, let's just think about this self-actualization and sort of saving yourself, right? And getting yourself better. And think about for a minute where the radical honesty, right? This radical honesty that he's talking about, and the censorship that he's experiencing, right? What it ends up doing is it ends up bringing way larger questions that don't seem related into view, right? So this brings in the BlackRock ETF, for example, right? The BlackRock ETF for Bitcoin that everyone's talking about. Now, if you look at what happened, so if you guys didn't see, the BlackRock thing came out, right? And now everyone else joined in. So there's Invesco, there's Citadel Securities, Fidelity, Charles Schwab. They're all going to be offering a non-custodial exchange. So everyone now commenting what people are saying in terms of the industry basically getting robbed, right? And here's what Max Kaiser said, right? I keep telling you guys, the SEC swept away the independent crypto exchanges and players to make room for BlackRock, Wisdom Tree, Fidelity to get into Bitcoin. And other people making that same observation. You had David Bailey, the CEO of this company, saying exactly that, right? Well played. Whoever thought these people were pushovers should have a better idea of how hard they're going to play, right? He said, so let me get this straight. They sent in their goon, SBF, pumped him full of money, enabled this massive Ponzi that wiped out the native industry. All the while, they were preparing their own exchanges and ETFs to come in and clean up the mess. Pretty genius, to be honest. Preston Pish said, I'm sorry, but after watching BlackRock, Fidelity, Citadel, Schwab, and now Deutsche Bank all apply for Bitcoin ETFs, spot exchanges, etc., only a few days after the SEC drops a TRO on Binance and sues Coinbase, how can't you think this entire past year was a giant inside job coordinated between the Wall Street parasites and government regulators so they could catch up? And indeed, a lot of people picking that up. Bruce Fenton sort of breaks it down, right? The drawbacks are risk of eventual fractional reserve Bitcoin holdings. BlackRock pushes ESG and other woke socialist stupidity. They are active investors who are used to control increased odds of a fork or code war or attempt to influence. And the benefits, he says, massive AUM, institutional influence and distribution opens doors for other competitors, right? He says Bitcoin will be fine with the risks. It's part of the cycle and the story. And at the end of the day, Bitcoin is a great story, right? Which is really why that whole issue is important, right? Bitcoin is a great story. And now Bitcoin is going to head straight to the middle of the 2024 presidential elections for these reasons. You've got two princes, right? You've got the Biden situation, which is all axed and geared on protecting this prince, versus a prince who is nothing but harassed and condemned and all that stuff. But in the middle is institutional corruption and these kinds of things. So, look, my prediction continues to be the only reason I even said RFK had a chance in the first place was because of this story, right? That Bitcoin fits into the story of JFK, and that we'll get to the bottom of that story as we move into a new era. That the corruption of the dollar goes as far back as the deputization of policing and all of those things in 1964 in order to deal with the assassination of JFK. That's why I predicted that RFK was going to be a Bitcoiner and involved in the story in November, right? Not because I had any secrets, I had none, right? It's simply that whole self-actualization argument and that people want the story. So if he's out there saying there's a demand for the truth, that's how far back the truth goes, right? That's the story that people want. And that's the story that I think is going to keep being out there. So there you go. Two princes, both saying they're involved in self-actualization. One of them more money laundering, the other cooler stuff. So there you go. All right. MSM thinks we're a bunch of idiots. They do. That's what's great. We're talking about the ancient alien technology of the pyramids. Cleopatra. Well, they were way before Cleopatra, right? Give the man a like. Indeed, give the man a like. We love likes. This is indeed. We're not against the sacrificed P-Man van. Hotez supporters. Yeah, we love that. So now I think I have one here for Hotez. I think I got a good one. Let me see if I got it. Oh yeah, this is the best. A little while ago, all these videos of Hotez people are bringing up. The best one that the video that Justin sent me yesterday, amazing. If you guys haven't seen the compilation of we need 2 shots, the one that's all clipped like a infomercial, right? 4 shots, 5 shots, great. But one of those clips here is that when Jon Stewart was talking about the lab leak, that it was an attack on science and it causes a lot of damage. So Glenn Greenwald is scraping all kinds of crazy things. And here's the one he brought up. He says, Professor Hotez is far too elevated and serious of a scholar to lower himself to debating RFK Jr. on Joe Rogan's program. He's an esteemed man of science who confines himself to the lofty heights of peer-reviewed journals and to interviews on TMZ. So the one where he actually said that Jon Stewart's lab leak is a joke and an attack on science was on TMZ. There you go. So that's what's going on. And Wall Street Silver says the following, right? Just in terms of the energy, this is him confirming my prediction. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if RFK Jr. defeats Joe Biden for the nomination. All of this publicity is definitely raising his profile. Recession in late 2023 to early 2024 will become a huge drag on Biden. Voters want change. If the polls indicate RFK Jr. has a chance, they will force Joe Biden to retire and get other Democrats in the race. They need someone they can control more easily than RFK Jr. His idea of this wartime stuff was pretty good too. Like teenagers playing World of Warcraft, these warmongers inside U.S. leadership drop war games and scenarios and pretend that a nuclear war is winnable. I call on every American to join in a new peace movement to make our voices heard, to reject the insanity of escalation, and to celebrate no longer the wartime president, but a president who keeps the peace. Pretty good stuff. Pretty good stuff. Mandatory minimum for Hunter. Why are you giving this weird history lesson that might not even be correct? Get sober and speak about Bitcoin. All right. Mandatory minimum. Yeah, we don't like them. We're not fans. Less ideology and conspiracies would be great for Bitcoin. Well, Ralph, I don't know what conspiracies you're talking about. Did I repeat a conspiracy here? Please cut your hair and take the cat. There's nothing more disturbing. I don't know if I'm trying to look like a teenager, my man. I hope to see some of you tonight at Pub, St. Paul, Montreal Bitcoin meetup. Cheers. Sorry, I'm always trying to look around my iPad, which blocks part of my screen here. Sound money, LFA. Indeed. All right, team. That's all I got for today. I hope you're doing well. See y'all soon. Peace. He did, when Hunter Biden ordered, he did NFTs. That was the most clever thing Mario Nawfal ever did, by the way. Mario Nawfal pranked him into doing an interview about NFTs. We love Mario Nawfal. Very funny. All right. Peace, Ranmore. Be good, my man.